Contribute widely. Don't just get stuck into one thing. Even if you are very shy and just want to be, a very technical subject matter expert, try and find ways to do that in a broad range of industries or companies, or maybe in a not-for-profit or something. But if you can, doing things widely, it can only help your primary job, and it will certainly help society. So broadness if you can.
I am an actuary.
I am an actuary.
I am an actuary.
Welcome to the We Are Actuaries podcast, where you'll meet leaders who use their actuarial powers to solve a range of problems and make a real difference. I am your host, Julia Lessing, and I'm a qualified actuary based in Australia. I help actuaries develop communication and leadership skills to build great actuarial careers. So settle in, learn from the best, and be inspired. Hi everyone. Today we're talking about using STEM skills for good. How can we, as actuaries, with our strong STEM skills, make a difference on boards, in public policy, and to help society? How can organisations harness the superpowers and the STEM skills of their actuaries, particularly for those who might be neurodivergent? And finally, and this might seem unrelated, but it's not, what could actuaries learn from being a stand-up comic? To answer these questions, I'm delighted to welcome Naomi Edwards to the show. Naomi, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Julia. Very honoured and happy to be talking to you today.
I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, Naomi, because I know that you're a proud actuary and you're also passionate about the contribution that people with a STEM background can make. And you've also had a really interesting career. You're a very experienced chair. You've got very extensive board experience, and you've had some very high-profile leadership roles as well. And you've been a stand-up comedian. So I'm super excited to hear your reflections on today's topic. But before we get into it, I would like to ask you my question that I ask all of my guests. Naomi, how do you use your actuarial superpowers to make a difference in the world?
Wow, that's a big question. By virtue of being actuaries, generally we're pretty good at using data to forecast situations. And for whatever reason, that means that we have a lot of opportunities in society, and generally we get paid quite a lot. And so I always think it's that saying, to the person to whom much is given, much is required. Mm-hmm. And so I guess I would say I try and use my superpower generously. In other words, if there are a lot of organisations and people in situations where being able to assist them by doing forecasting, using their data of what the future situation is, can really make a difference to their understanding of the future. And it can be an individual who needs help with their budgeting. It could be a not-for-profit who needs help with their budgeting, or who needs to prove a business case or establish something. Or it could be a business unit inside your organisation that's not related to your own. So I've always tried to use the capability I have, which is just a straight actuarial, I can, do some coding or some modelling. I can build a financial forecast generously in a wide range of circumstances because, I can. I got given that ability. I'm not starving. I can make time. So use it generously if you have it.
I love that. So it sounds like you feel as though the actuarial profession and the actuarial skill set has given you a lot. And so you feel that responsibility to give generously and use it to help so many others as well.
Especially because, unfortunately, in society, there's a real fear about anything to do with finance or forecasting or budgeting. And so people feel that, oh, we can't do a 10-year forecast of how things are going to look because that's going to be a really hard thing to do.
Mm.
In fact, they probably could if they had more confidence, but for us, that's easy. That's why I love the Actuaries Institute hackathon, where young, smart actuaries help not-for-profits to develop business cases or solutions. That's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about that just, makes my heart sing to people participating in the hackathon.
I agree, Naomi. I think the actuarial skill set has so much opportunity to really make a lot of difference so widely, not just in insurance and financial services, but to society more broadly. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so it sounds like you have really thought deeply about how your actuarial superpowers can be applied, not just how they can be used, but how generously they can be applied as well. And I really love that. So Naomi, you wear many hats, and actuary is one of those hats, but you have also been a stand-up comic. And I remember that attracted some mainstream media attention over the years. But what did you learn from the experience of being on stage telling jokes?
Well, I guess the main thing I learned was that I've got a pretty big ego because there's nothing I like better than being the center of attention. So that's something that I have to moderate at board meetings, for example, which is not all about one person being the center of attention. I think reading the room is really important. So when you're a stand-up, you're actually constantly scanning your audience and you go into a state of heightened awareness. I think this is something all speakers do when they're on stage. You're hyper vigilant as to who's actually listening or paying attention. And it's very distressing if even one person is not fully focused. And all of your attention, at least for me, will go on to, okay, that one person is on their phone. I don't care if 400 people are rapt and laughing. I have to draw that person back in. So you just ramp up the energy until you bring them back in. And so I think having energy in a presentation is the most important thing. And certainly as a comedian, you'll see comedians move around the stage a lot. They jump and they swing the mic. It's all about ramping the energy up because that's how you draw an audience in and keep them there. So, yeah, I think I learned that, which helps me when I'm presenting at a conference. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I like the way you described that, all presenters do that. I'd go so far as to say that all good presenters do that because I've sat in the audience of certain presentations where it's felt like the presenter's so caught up in themselves and they're not really reading the room. But what do you do differently? How do you prepare so that you can be in that place where you can read the room and you're not just sort of thinking about what you're going to say next or what joke you're going to tell next?
Well, you can't be thinking about what you're going to say next or what joke you're going to say next because then you're not reading the room. And so first off, you don't want any distractions. So like for me, PowerPoint would be a big distraction because then I'd be having to think about, clicking it or turning around to look at my PowerPoint. But you don't want to ever look at your PowerPoint. All your focus has to be on the audience. So no distractions. Secondly, you need to know your material so well that you're not thinking about what's coming next. You're actually just in the moment and interacting with the audience. And for me, that means a lot of work to actually try and deep memorize the script. And deep memorization is about muscle memory, not about brain memory. So a stand-up comedian will rehearse by saying their speech over and over again, preferably with an audience, but usually no family member is going to tolerate listening 29 times to the same routine. So just having the muscle memory of your mouth getting around the words, which of course is also the way that actors and actresses rehearse. That means that when you're talking, you're actually just in the zone, telling the story. It feels so familiar. it feels like you're telling a great friend the story of, a great holiday you have. You don't have to think about what comes next. It's just a story that you're telling. So being across it in that way, and by definition, that means keeping it simple, because you can't remember big, long numbers in things. And, no talk should ever have big, long numbers. So keeping your language simple, rehearsing your language, using your mouth, not just reading it over and over again. And that way you can let go of the talk and focus on being there, having a conversation, albeit a one-way conversation with your audience.
Yeah, wow. So that muscle memory of saying it out loud so your mouth knows what to do, just repeating out loud what you're going to say. And would you have to do it 29 times?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And what about when you're then presenting? So you were the Actuaries Institute president last year in 2023. Yeah. When you were preparing to get up and have those, do those presentations with that in that capacity, would you do the same sort of thing? Prepare, practice out loud what you were going to say?
You're listening to the We Are Actuaries podcast, brought to you by the Guardian Actuarial Leadership Program. If you're looking for a tailored training program to help you build your communication and leadership skills, registrations are now open. Head over to guardianactuarial.com.au for more information.
Yeah, it depends. So with the president's speech, that's like a 17-minute formal speech where every word has been kind of peer reviewed and reviewed by others. And that's the kind of situation, if somebody from APRA or ASIC, is giving a talk, they're highly regulated, every word matters, they can't slip. So in that case, either you're going to read it or you're going to memorize it or you're going to have cue cards. But for 90% of my speeches with the actuaries, they were informal and so they were impromptu. So I would very deliberately never write a speech, and I would just think of 3 ideas that I wanted to talk to, and I would memorize roughly the ideas. It's really easy, there only be 3, and what order I would talk to them in, and then I would just talk to it from the heart. Because I either go incredibly well memorized right across the material or no material and just ad lib, because the worst situation is just writing a speech and reading it. That just takes you away from your audience completely.
Yeah. It's not very engaging for the audience to listen to somebody who's just reading something out loud. And if you're reading something in that live setting, it's really hard to read the room. It's really hard to connect. And I love the point you made about storytelling, because that's a technique I use, and it's a technique I suggest to my guests on the podcast as well. And I know you don't have any notes today, because I think stories are wonderful. They make it easier for us as a presenter to remember, because we're not remembering our script. We can easily tell a story because it makes sense to us. And especially if it's a real story. And it's interesting for our audience as well. It helps them to visualize the message that we're trying to share.
Doesn't always work. Once I was doing a comedy show in Bristol in the UK. It was on at midnight, which is the wrong time slot for me, and the audience threw beer cans at me. So
really? Oh my goodness. Was it a routine you delivered somewhere else before?
Yeah, stand-up comedy is a brutal game.
Oh,
so by contrast, a financial service conference seems pretty tame to me.
Unlikely to be throwing beer cans at a financial services conference. Yeah. Amazing. So just finishing off on your role as the president of the Actuaries Institute, what was the highlight of that year for you?
Oh gosh, do I get 2 highlights?
Yeah. Okay.
So my first highlight was definitely the president gets to award the graduation certificates to really qualifying fellows of the Actuaries Institute. And a lot of those fellows, like their parents were there. Some had flown in from China or Hong Kong or Nepal or wherever. New Zealand, and they were so proud. And then others of them were first generation migrants to Australia. Some didn't speak a lot of English. And just to see their kids being recognised and honoured, and to have made that achievement of being a fellow of the Actuaries Institute or an associate of the Actuaries Institute, the joy and the pride, and you knew that that mum and dad or auntie or sister had worked so hard to create the circumstance that led to their kid being there in Sydney or Melbourne, dressed in a Infinity Moo or whatever.
Yep.
Just so hard work, so much pride.
Yeah.
And so for me, such an honour to be there, the one, shaking their hand and giving them the certificate. So that was one highlight. The other highlight was actually on the Asian tours, just visiting our members in Asia and New Zealand, actually, who don't have a lot of close contact with us, with the Actuaries Institute, because they live overseas, so they don't get to go to many events and things.
Right.
But gee, they're proud of the education that they received from the Actuaries Institute in Australia. They're amazing ambassadors for the Actuaries Institute, and they're doing remarkable things, talking to the actuaries who work at Grab, which is, the Uber of Southeast Asia, or the actuaries at Cathay Pacific, or just fascinating, interesting work. It was great. And so I talked to a very young woman who works for Alibaba in Shanghai or Beijing, I think it was Shanghai, and she was telling me how she's the boss of a large team of data scientists and analysts. And she was saying, oh, well, of course, as the actuary, I would be the boss of the data science, because what I learned in Australia has made me such a good data scientist and AI expert. I was like, wow, just such an honour and a privilege to meet our members who are overseas.
How wonderful to be sharing in those milestones, those important milestones, and having those touch points with actuaries in their career journeys at those important points. And you spoke earlier, Naomi, about your passion on how it warms your heart to see the hackathon and the opportunities that actuaries can give generously back to society. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what is it about actuaries or people with a STEM background that's so unique and special in the way that they contribute to boards, public policy, society more broadly?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's just that we're data-driven. And, the scientific methodology, which has kind of been around for, I guess, 3,000 or 4,000 years, the fact that we're open to changing our minds based on what the data says. So we tend not to be very stuck in our views or dogmatic. We're trained to, change our minds as the data changes. We're excited to see something new emerge out of the research or the experiment or the data. And so I think that makes us very fit for living in a time of, things are changing fast, in many respects. Our political situation is changing fast. Corporations are changing fast. The challenges we're addressing are changing really quickly, particularly with AI. So we need leaders who can learn new things and adapt rapidly. And I do think because of the scientific method and our focus on evidence and data, that makes us very fit for purpose, in a rapidly changing economy and a rapidly changing world.
It's an interesting one, the use of data, isn't it? Because there's a lot of talk about it. There's a lot of talk about how much the volume of data that's available. But unless we can harness it, unless you make use of it and do something with it and draw some insights out of it, it's not going to be as valuable as it could be. And I think what you're saying is that, actuaries can do that and also not be locked into our views, but to be able to adapt and stay up to date as the data changes and as the insights are changing as well.
Which means that we either need to be really good at communicating that the data is changing and therefore how we need to respond needs to change, or we need to be part of a team where there are some really good communicators, because that is where we're not as well trained in communicating as, a teacher or an actor or a politician or a lawyer. So that is our weak spot. And I think when we can kind of nail that, and truly a big shout out to what you do, with your company.
Thank you.
Improving the communications of actuaries. If we can nail that, then that is really, a good combination.
Thank you. I think I agree with you that the communication skills, that's the missing piece, isn't it? From being able to analyse the data. But if we can't communicate the results of our work in a way that our audience can understand and read the room, if they're not understanding as we're trying, then it's very difficult for us to have that impact that we could otherwise have.
And not everyone has to be able to do that. Subject matter experts who just can't do that. That's fine. That's what teams are all about. But that would limit your ability to go beyond being a subject matter expert if that's what you want. So
yes. Yeah.
It's horses for courses.
Horses for courses. Yeah. Yep. So speaking of horses for courses, part of your career path has involved extensive board experience. You're a very experienced chair. You have a very experienced non-executive director, as well as having your corporate or consulting roles before that. And you're the chair-elect of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. So some quite senior leadership roles there. But speaking of boards, what skills do you think actuaries can bring to boards?
Well, actuaries are going to be really good at helping the board to do governance around the data analytics, the data science, the AI, the technology that's going to be underpinning a lot of the initiatives, because every company now is deeply involved in technology. It's deeply involved in analysing its data and forecasting that and making decisions, whatever you're in, whether in retailing or airlines or infrastructure or financial services. And actuaries can help the board to figure out, well, how do we actually have a view about whether that's right, or how do we ask good questions? If our head of tech or our head of AI is telling us ABC, what would be some good questions to ask? So I think that we can help a lot in that regard. We can really help with risk, because we naturally, we think about black swan events. We think about unknown. So we have a way of thinking, which you could say, it's kind of a black hat way of thinking, in that we think about, wow, this really bad thing could happen. What could we do there? But it's only because we want to work out, okay, what's a mitigant? How do we plan for that? So I actually think we make really strong contributions on risk committees as well as on boards.
That's a really interesting point that you've made there about risk and thinking about risk. We've just wrapped up our senior leadership program for the semester, and one of the topics we talk about is how do we think about risk and how do we harness risk, and not just think, there's a risk, we shouldn't do anything, but there's a risk, what does that mean? How could we get the upside from that? How can we manage that risk? And I think what you were talking about just with that black hat thinking, it can be easy to stay in that, or we're just going to find out what's going to go wrong, or we're going to avoid doing things because of that. But how powerful it can be when we can think differently and think broadly about, what does that mean, and be able to communicate that.
To think about, okay, the really, really bad thing is going to happen, and our company's going to come out of this way ahead of everyone else. Now, how did that happen? What did we do? What did we do differently?
What's the opportunity? Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, so one more topic I wanted to cover today, and it's around neurodiversity. Now, this is coming up in lots of my conversations, especially lately. And so and I know you've spoken about it sometimes as well, so I wanted to ask your thoughts. I realise that many people who are brilliant in STEM are also neurodivergent, not all. But how can organisations be more inclusive to really be able to get the best out of people who are neurodivergent?
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard a paper recently by a great actuary, Madhu Ranjan, I think, who works with the NDIS, and she's done a lot of research into autism.
Yes, she has some excellent work.
Excellent work. And her research, amongst many things, her research has mentioned the fact that statistically, a lot of engineers, for example,
Right.
their kids are often, on the spectrum. So
Interesting.
yeah, it is. So there's definitely a genetic component. And I think we can assume that the same would be true for actuaries, right? We probably don't need to analyse it to figure it out.
Yeah.
I think that as an employer, the main thing is to create an environment where somebody feels really safe and welcome to talk about their own neurodiversity and what would help them be better in the workplace. For some people, it's as simple as turning the lights down a bit or having dimmer lights or, having quieter workstations. There can be very simple fixes to some that can just make the workplace much more pleasant to be in, or that people, need to work from home, but sometimes they want to come in, but in a particular way. So I think having a conversation that says it's okay to be who you are and, talk with us about it. And managers, I think giving managers the training that they need, not only to be really good leaders of the people, but also to initiate conversations, what kind of workplace do you like? How can I help manage you best? So I don't think it's specifically different to just being a good manager per se, but oh my gosh, our understanding of what that means has moved drastically just in the past 2 or 3 years, right? Just in terms of respect for, not just neurodiversity, but just the fact that, psychological safety is so important now at work. And, boards have a legal responsibility now, to create safe environments. So I don't think it's that different, but it's interesting and it's fun, just such simple changes we can make around the office and stuff can make life a lot better for people.
So keeping the communication open, creating safe space so that people can say, here's what I need, and being open to exploring different options, whether it's managing sensory stresses, sensory components to the environment, or, certain routines, flexibility. And as you said, Naomi, it's not that different from just being a good manager and promoting good psychosocial safety and a psychological safe workplace, which we all need to do now legally, but thinking differently. Maybe what works for us isn't what everyone in our team needs, and being able to have that conversation to find out, well, what do they need and what adjustments can we make?
Yes. And for example, for a long time, I really championed, open plan workspaces in companies on the board, because that was, the thing. And that definitely leads to a better buzz and creativity and idea sparking. It's very efficient because you kind of just hear what's going on, so you don't need to be retold. But then I realized that I thought about the fact that I personally just can't work in an open plan office because my brain just goes into overfry and just kind of melts down. And so it's like, oh, okay, so why are we saying this is great for everybody? Because I certainly like a nice, very quiet, dim-lit environment. So, yeah, I think it's important that we're not all lumped into the same thing.
Yeah, because we're all different. We all have different needs to be productive and to be able to work.
Yeah, well, we as employers just want to maximize productivity, right? So set an environment where people can do that. And if their head's exploding because there's so many conversations about, too much water cooler conversation can be as bad as no water cooler conversation.
Yeah. It could have the opposite effect
At the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, some really good points there. Naomi, it's been really great hearing some of your learnings and reflections from your very unique and diverse career path. I'd like to finish our interview with one question, and it's this. What's your top tip for actuaries who want to make a difference?
Contribute widely. Don't just get stuck into one thing. Even if you are very shy and just want to be, a very technical subject matter expert, try and find ways to do that in a broad range of industries or companies, or maybe in a not-for-profit or something. But if you can, doing things widely, it can only help your primary job, and it will certainly help society. So broadness if you can.
Great advice. Naomi, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation and hearing some of your stories and reflections from your career to date. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Julia. I love your podcast, and it's very exciting to actually be on one.
Thanks, Naomi.
So there you have it, real life stories and practical tips from a leader using their actuarial superpowers to make a difference in the world. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to get in touch, subscribe, leave us a review and share it with your network. You'll find details from today's interview in the show notes below and on our website www.guardianactuarial.com.au. Until next time.